Hey everyone, this is Bathymetrics, and I'm taking a break from the string of grid school videos I've been doing for the grid and Bitwig 3.0. Taking a break to do something different and a little more fun, going back to my original theme of Bitwig versus Ableton, kind of explaining how things you may be used to doing in Ableton a certain way, how they can be done in Bitwig at least as well, if not better. And today the subject is going to be about a kind of sound design and drop sounds arranging, a technique that a lot of us are used to in Ableton from using the simpler instrument and a push controller to create something we call mudpies, which are big, long sound design resamples with lots of interesting things going on inside them. And then we typically load that into simpler. And then on our push, there's all these nice knobs that will automatically do this sort of randomized, quasi-randomized slicing of that big long mud pile. And you can choose specific places in that mud pie to trigger a new sound. And you can fine tune where those things are triggering. And you can basically come up with effectively a little drum pad that you can play like an instrument. And it plays sounds. And so here's an example of the same exact effect or outcome in Bitwig. And I'm going to show you in this video how I approach this and how quick and easy it can be in Bitwig with the right tools. So first of all, here's what it sounds like. Okay, so there's nothing really exciting about that drop. It's just one idea among many that I can come up with, and I'm going to show you that. It's just, one little simple taste just to tease you in the video here. What you're hearing is I've got a quarter note sub kind of pulse from a custom sub I made in Sublab that is a Moog Sub 37 emulation. That's basically sounds a lot like the Moog Sub 37 sub. And I've just got a simple quarter note pattern in E. I've done this particular project in the key of E. And then I have a drum pattern coming out of my absolute favorite drum machine ever called XO by XLN Audio. And all this pattern is playing right now is a very simple kick and snare pattern. Everything else is kind of turned off. So we got the kick here and the snare here. And this isn't halftime like dubstep, even though it sounds like dubstep. I'm actually running at a tempo that is common for mid-tempo bass, like 1788L and Res and Black Gummy and those artists. So because the tempo is so slow, it sounds heavy and slow like dubstep. And I've turned off all the other instruments because when I'm sound designing, I just like to hear the downbeat and the backbeat, and I set things up against that. And then down here is where I'm doing the actual chopping. And for this, I'm using something called Serato sample, because this is the easiest, fastest way to do a similar kind of workflow in Bitwig to what you may be used to doing in simpler with a push 2 over in Ableton. So let's let you watch Serato sample while I do this. I've got a mudpie loaded into here, about a 5-minute mudpie, and I've just got different segments of the big audio resample clip that are set to trigger for certain pads. There's 16 pads, and these are actually laid out exactly like the pads in the first 16 pads in a drum machine, right? So they're laid out in exactly, this type of order. And I can actually, and I think they even start on C1 by default. And then I can simply switch my push 2, which is running Moss's great push for Bitwig script for Bitwig. So it lets me use my push 2 with Bitwig. I just flip over to the layout that's like a drum machine layout, and I can play my pads in exactly this configuration. So I play it like a drum machine. And that's how I recorded this MIDI clip, was just coming up with an interesting groove on the drum machine based on where these sample start positions are in the mudpie. So here's what it sounds like again. You can watch what Serato does. So how does the workflow actually work? How do we do this from top to bottom? The first thing I'd like to point out is I personally feel it's useful to have a drum and even a sub, some sort of kick snare pattern and some sort of simple sub pattern just to give you the feels you want. And in fact, subs are such an important part of a lot of bass music subgenres within electronic dance music, like, dubstep rhythm, D&B, all the good stuff, trap. The drums are so essential, and the sub, the bass, the 808 is so essential that sometimes I will, in my sound design sessions or in working on the very first stages of a brand new song, I'll come up with the sub rhythm first against the basic downbeat and backbeat of the drums. Like I'll come up with an 808 pattern or a sub pattern that carries the song and has interest all by itself and has some movement in the subs. In this case, I'm keeping it simple. This is my quick and dirty template that's always active. When I load up a new project, this is what it looks like by default. I have all kinds of things set up on here so I can just, grab a sound design channel and start working. You can get this fancy if you want or not, but it loads up in like 5 seconds because most everything's deactivated by default. And, I like to work against the drums and the sub. So I'll come in here to something like the sound design channel. And usually the first thing I'll drop in is, let's get this up in focus again. On the sound design channel, I usually start with an instrument selector and I'll drop my favorite synth in there, whether it's Serum or Phase Plant or Avenger or Thorn or any other type of, synth that I like and use a lot and understand. And I'll find a preset and I'll tweak it, or I'll just make something from scratch. These days, I'm also starting out with polygrid devices that are made in Bitwig because you can get some really great, interesting raw bass sounds out of that. But the idea is you start with some sort of sample or preset or something. You could even drop in a sample and play a sample loop, right? But something that's interesting and has the full spectrum filled out with lots of sounds. In this case, this is what the original thing sounded like. Let's do you, and let's just see if I can play this one. Probably get all the drums too. Let's turn everything off. Let's just play this clip. And then this is a simple E note for one bar that just loops endlessly. So it's just constantly playing the synth patch over and over and over while I do some tweaking to it with Portal. I was using Portal to do the mudpie making. So this is what it sounds like without Portal active. This was the original patch. Okay, so you typically want to start with some kind of preset or loop that is really filling out the entire spectrum and has a lot of highs in it. You want highs because a lot of things you're going to do to create a mudpie will be filtering out the low or attenuating the highs, or you need the full spectrum filled out. And that's usually a good sound to go with, and also a sound with some interesting motion and movement to it already. And then the basic idea is you set up another track like this one here. You can see that I set, no, that's the bounce. First, what I did was I did Control-Shift-T to make a new audio track. And I set the input to be the output of the sound design track. And I basically take the post, or pre, your choice, right? But I take the output of the sound design track and I get this ready to record. And then I set this up to record and I start recording. But first, before I do that, let's go turn on the particular device I wanted to use to mess with things. And there's all kinds of, you can use glitch plugins, you can use various sound design plugins. You can drop in channel racks from Sound Toys or the Serum FX or whatever. You can play with all sorts of things while the sound just runs over and over and over, and you're resampling it into a new audio track. So in this case, I was just trying to see how well Portal would work for this kind of mudpie design. And I'll just leave it on this one patch for now, but well, I'll show you what I did. So you come down here and you set up a new track to resample into, you set up your routing, and then you just basically start playing and record enable and start messing around. And we'll stop playback, you get the idea. So what we have here in this clip that we've resampled to, if we double click it, we have a big long audio clip. It's about 27 bars long. And you can see all the crazy stuff that Portal was doing to my original synth sound. And this is a mudpie. So here's the actual audio sample that was recorded in this clip. And typically what I would do is come up here and right click and do reveal file. And let's bring this down from my other monitor. So here's the new file. And the first thing I'm going to do is rename it to something a little more obvious. So I'm going to do rename, and I'll call this mudpie. I usually use a date, 2019-08-18, and then I'll put in the key, so the key of E, and I'll put in the BPM that it was originally recorded at. Because this is helpful months later when I pull this out for a sound design session and I want to know what was the original key, what was the original tempo, because sometimes that's important. So I've renamed this, and by renaming it here in the file system in Windows, I've effectively broken this clip, because this clip that I just recorded still thinks that what's inside of it is an audio event called Audio 2-1, which, the project hasn't really caught up with yet, but it doesn't exist, even though I've renamed it. If I were to open up this project, it would complain that Audio 2.1 was missing, and do I want to replace it? So I'm just going to take care of that now by clicking this and doing replace, and coming over to the thing that I just renamed, and open. And now this is in the project, it recognizes it. You can see that this clip is now showing the new thing that I renamed it. So it's just a little bit of simple housekeeping that you can do with the Files tab over here in Bitwig. And just get that in place, and then, make sure everything's named and hooked up right, and then save your project, and everything's hunky-dory after that. So now this thing's named correctly. And a lot of times when I'm done in a mudpie making session, I'll make a bunch of these. I'll spend, half hour just making crazy mud pies, all kinds of different ways, from all kinds of different sounds. And then I'll take what's in my project folder and I'll literally drag these over into my user library, in my sample library, in a special place where I keep all my mud pies. And then I just have this big collection of mud pies I can always draw upon later for other songs, for sound design. So you saw how fast it was to make this, right? And it's just full of juicy, juicy things. So I don't really need this audio track anymore, so I'm just going to select it and delete it. And now I'm going to make, I'm going to flip over to Arranger view for a minute. I do this just to see how long things are. So let me make a new track here under Delete Me Bounds, Control-Shift-T for an audio track. And let me click this to shut off everything that was happening in the clip launcher and make all of this active again in the Arranger timeline. I'm going to go grab that mudpie and just drag it in here and just see how long it is, right? Usually, like I said, I'll go 5 or 10 minutes doing all kinds of crazy stuff. In this case, the whole thing is, all of about a minute long. So I don't need to chop, I don't need to cut it or anything, right? I'm just going to use it as is. So I can kill this off. But you can see up here where I had a big long 10-minute mudpie, I chopped it to make like a 5-minute chunk. Because you don't want to have to wade through 10 and 15 minutes worth of mudpie to find the good starting points of the samples inside. You want to have something shorter so you can skim through it. So I could have loaded this into Serato and picked some sounds from here, but that'll come another time. So here's the one we just made, and let's use this as an example. I don't really need this track anymore, so I'm going to get rid of it. And I'm going to go down here below my existing Serato sample track, and I'm going to flip back over here to clip launcher mode because it's a lot easier to do this next part in your clip mode. So I'm going to make a new track, Control T, because it's going to be an instrument track. And I'm going to come in here and go over to my user library and find my pre-built Serato chopper preset, which is kind of already pre-built to do what I'm doing quickly. So we'll drag it into this track. And what this comprises is it's an instrument selector. You can tell it's a selector because it has this little index number up here and these little yellow dots. And I'll show you why I do this inside of an instrument selector in a moment. But for now, we're going to just start with the Serato sample instance that's inside it. So there's one instance of Serato sample, and it's empty. There's nothing inside it. However, it is already pre-configured to have multiple outs and to take every one of its pads and send them out into a different sub-channel. This is very important. I've done other videos like this before, but if we were to flip over into mixer mode, and take a look here and go find this new Serato chopper track right here. And if I were to click this, you would see that I have a whole bunch of individual channels for every single pad in Serato, all pads 1 through 16. And that's important, just like it is in a standard Bitwig or Ableton drum machine. That's important so that I can, stop that, not caps lock tab, so that I can actually do individual processing on any one of these tracks to further beef up or make whatever's coming through this track more interesting. And again, I'll show that in a second. So into this empty Serato sample, I'll come back over here to my file tab, grab that mudpie I just made and just drag it in. And Serato is great because it knows it's an E. It's a little bit off of the BPM of 90, but don't worry about that because over here I'm saying to sync with the project tempo. See, when this is solid, it's basically saying just use the host tempo. And it doesn't matter if Serato is off by like a few digits of a BPM. I mean, you could turn it off sync and come here and double click and set this to 90, but there's no point for this type of workflow. So just make sure it's on sync by default. It doesn't even matter what internal tempo Serato might normally play at if you pressed its own play button, because now everything's just running against the DAW clock. Okay, samples loaded, all the pads are empty. So here's what's really cool about Serato, and this is kind of similar to the simpler in Bitwig. Now, if you don't use Ableton, I'm sorry, the simpler in Ableton. If you don't use Ableton, if you've never used Ableton, this may go over your head, but I don't want to set up an old version of Ableton and show you what this looks like. So just work with me. there's a special newer type of sampler Ableton has called Simpler. And Ableton also has this great hardware controller called a Push or Push 2. And their hardware controller is very tightly integrated with Live. Fortunately, because the API for the Push is an open API, we have some very bright people in the Bitwig world who make custom controller templates and controller extensions to let us use our pushes with Bitwig. So I'm still using a Push, but I don't have access to Simpler because that's an Ableton thing. And in Ableton, you can load a big mudpie into a Simpler, and then there's a bunch of slice options that'll just like randomly find points for you, or just find a point every 2 beats or every quarter note. Or you can just say, fill this up with a whole bunch of slicing points, and then let me kind of twiddle a button to make fewer of them or more of them. There's just a lot of creative and semi-random ways to just take a big mudpie like this and kind of sort of randomly pick some starting points for each pad. And then, you know, you can play your push like a drum machine, and it's just playing the different slices that you've set up in the Simpler. Well, Bitwig does have a function kind of like that. If we go over to the arranger timeline, I could take this mudpie bounce and I could right click it and I could say slice to drum machine or slice to multisample. And it's going to effectively do a similar thing. Like I'm going to do slice to drum machine. And we're basically saying bounce it to a new track and bounce it pre-fader, keep it 32-bit floating point, which is what you always want to do, 32-bit floating point for bounces internally in your DAW. And then you have questions about, well, how do you want to slice it up? Do you want to slice it at every 8th note? Do you want to slice it at other note values, 1 slice per bar, or 1 slice per audio event that's in a clip? Like if you've split up a clip in a bunch of places, you can just have it make a new slice at the start of each audio event inside the audio clip. Or you can have beat markers or onsets in that clip and have it slice automatically according to those. And a lot of these are similar to the options you have in Simpler over in Ableton. The problem is this. And before I actually do that, let me show you part of the problem. So here's the mudpie I might be bouncing on. And if we go to the clip view and we say, show us the onsets, do you see any onsets here? I don't see any onsets here. Do you see any onsets here? Okay, there they are. We zoom in a lot. And look at how many bazillion onsets are in here, right? If I slice, and the onsets are not in smart places, not by default. Let me zoom way in close here. Why do I have all these onsets super close together? Okay, it's not a drum sample, so the detection algorithm that automatically places onset markers doesn't really know what to do with this. This is a bass patch, a resampled bass patch, and it's just got tons and tons and tons of these spurious offsets that aren't necessary. Yeah, you could say that's a transient, you could say that's a transient, but there's so many transients in a typical bass resample that you just get flooded with offsets. So for me to split at onsets, right? The problem is that this split thing, if I say slice to drum sample, if I slice it, no matter what I pick, even if I pick onsets, it limits the total number of slices to 128, which makes perfect sense because that's how many keys you have in a drum machine, basically. How many MIDI notes you have across the MIDI spectrum. So, you know, they can't slice it to any larger number of slices than 128. It's like either that number or less, and I could make this number smaller if I wanted, right? But the point is, I can only have 128 of these things, and what I don't want are little tiny slices like this. These are useless. You need a longer bit of waveform to use for groove chopping or drop chopping, or mudpie chopping. You need longer slices, and this just won't do because there's way too many of them. And so if I were to try slicing this at 128 slices, I'd probably get this much of the waveform sliced up, or maybe this much, and that's too short. Okay, so I would have to come in here and start deleting onset markers, or just mass delete all of them by selecting one and then doing Control A and then hitting delete to just mass delete them all. But then I'd have to come in and manually put in onset markers at places that made sense to me. Like, I might come in here after deleting all the original onset markers, and I might put an onset marker every 2 bars. Or I could put a beat marker, a stretch marker every 2 bars down here at the bottom. And then once I had set all that up manually, then I could do a slice that would make sense, because I could say slice to drum machine and, slice at beat marker or onset. And, I would end up getting longer, more useful slices to start with. So let's just do it simple. Let's just say, let's slice this at bars. Bars? How long is this? If we slice at a bar, how many slices will I get? Yeah, 128 slices at a bar. So if I do this, we get, in a second, it has to think it's up under my logo here. It says slice to drum machine, and it's doing a progress indicator. So it's working through this mudpie. It's making a slice at every bar. And yada, yada, yada. It's about 70% done, 80% done, 90% done, and here it comes. Come on, you can do it. Where is it? Show me the money. Okay, put it down here at the very bottom of the project. So this is what it does by default. It sets up and it didn't slice by bar. What the hell is wrong with you? It said it was slicing by bar, but it sure sliced by, well, I guess it did. Yeah. It's because I'm zoomed in so far. So we have one slice for every bar. Starts at the bottom of the MIDI range for C-2, goes all the way to the top, and goes way the hell over to the top of the MIDI range. So we have this slice, and it's in a drum machine, right? And every one of these rows from the bottom up is filled up with a slice. And if I click the play button, let's turn this on, might help. Okay, so that's cool, but there's a problem with Bitwig's drum machine, and it drives me crazy. In Ableton, if you slice to a drum machine, you can right-click the header for the drum machine, and there's an option on the menu that says choke all pads by, and you can choose how to choke all pads, right? So typically for chopping, you want to have every pad instantly choke every other pad, because you're trying to flip it very vertically and tightly and between 2 different sounds on 2 different pads, and you don't want them overlapping into each other. You don't want the tail of the first pad ringing out while you're already starting to play the second pad. You're trying to create a vertical kind of feeling that just abruptly chops between each sound in the drum machine. So in Ableton, it's easy to set up a drum machine in one click to just have every pad choke every other pad automatically. But in Bitwig, hopefully someday they're going to add this. I've certainly asked for this feature request, but it hasn't shown up yet. In Bitwig, you have to right-click every single pad and say, what are its specific choke targets? One of the options being all. Like I could say, this pad should choke every other pad. Or you can do it the reverse way around and say, this pad should be choked by either specific pads or all pads, right? So if I do choke by all, great. But I've only set it up for one out of these 128 pads. I have to go to the next pad now and say choke by all. And then to the next pad and choke by all. And I think you can see why this just isn't practical for this particular workflow. It's fine if you have a small little drum machine with 16 pads in it, and for whatever reason, you might want some of those drum sounds to choke off other specific drum sounds. That's great. That's not a huge burden for that typical drum machine workflow. But when you're trying to chop up mudpies or flip samples using Bitwig's drum machine, forget it. This takes forever. You can see why it would take forever to set this up in the native Bitwig tools. So this is for the birds. until they, at least until they give us a global option to just automatically set the choking values for everything in a drum pad in one operation. Drum pad's unusable. And they also probably need to give us some slightly better slicing options in the first place that let us, for example, have a bigger slicing option than just one bar. Like if I have a 10-minute mud pie, I might want to slice every 4 bars, or I might want to slice every 2 bars to take a big 10-minute chunk and effectively squeeze it down into 128 slices. Or it'd be great to have an option that says, I don't care what specific note value or grid value you chop it at, just take the whole thing and give me exactly 64 slices. Or just take the whole thing, no matter how long or short it is, and turn it into 128 slices. Or turn it into 16 slices, which is actually the easiest because you don't want to have to think about more than 16 drum pads at one time. So until we get some more slicing options and until they improve the ability to set up the choking behavior in a fully loaded up drum machine, or even 16 pads, it's still too much time to do it for 16 pads, right? Until they give us that drum machine Bitwig slicing options that they have today, great for other use cases, still really good, but not good for this use case. So this brings me back to why we use Serato sample. I've taken this mudpie and I've loaded it into this instance of Serato. I think, yeah, mudpie E today. So let's keep that muted. Let's keep this muted. And now we're effectively working in this instance of Serato, and there's no pads on here. So I went through this whole rigmarole of all the crap you have to do to get a mudpie sliced up into a drum machine and then have all of the pads choke every other pad. Well, by contrast, if you spend a little money on this VST, which is a great VST, watch what happens if I click this button. Boom. It just found me 16 random slices all throughout the mudpie. And they're probably going to be pretty good by default. Over on my push, I'm flipping myself into drum pad mode, and I'm going to play these 16 pads in order. Oh, let's see, what am I missing here? Got to turn that solo off. Okay, let's try this. Look at that. Those are like almost that whole set's good right out of the gate. So again, I could come up here and flip back over into this mode. And let's play my sub bass. Let's make sure this one's not going to play. Let's just start the drum pattern. I have to turn solo off. Let's add the sub bass. All right. And now I'm going to come down here and I'm just going to riff over the kick and the sub. Okay, you see how that works? I mean, you know, my timing's messed up, but you're feeling the kick, you're feeling the downbeat, you're feeling the backbeat. You decide whether you're gonna, you know, slam home that first growl on the downbeat of the kick, or if you're gonna start on the off accents, you know, the hi-hat off notes or off beats in between the kick and the snare. You can come up with any kind of human groove you like. Now I'm just gonna be a fool and have bad timing and mess around here just so you can see some different options to experiment with. And remember, all I did was press one button to randomly find these things. We'll talk about how to fine tune them in just a second, but watch me riffing on just the set that Serato found for me. So you get the idea. I'm just playing that like an instrument. My own human feel, my own human timing. And if we want to record that, let's go ahead and record that. The trick for recording your humanized mudpie chops or your sample flips, if we were doing this in the hip hop kind of genre, is you come here to the track that you have the Serato chopper on. Make sure it's record enabled so you can play it. And then double click to create an empty clip. And the first thing we want to do is make it, I tend to like to make 4-bar chops because everything in well-built DJ-friendly music probably changes every 4 bars or every 8 bars. So I never work with chops that are smaller, chop patterns that are smaller than 4 bars. So you double click to create it. By default, it's usually a looping length of 1 bar. So let's just kick this up to 4. So now this is a 4-bar loop. The other thing we're going to do is set the play mode to be the new, yay, finally, legato play mode called continue. And what that means is if I jump around between different chops I'm going to make here, every time I play a new one, it's just going to pick up in sync with the timing of the 4-bar loop that the drum pad and the drum machine is doing. So set it to continue, set it to 4 bars. And now you have something you can duplicate out. Control D, 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 D. And now I have 8 empty clips ready to just vibe and work in, okay? Now the next thing you need to know is that if one of these is playing, it's not recording anything yet, even though this record button is enabled. There's nothing being recorded there. But if you look right up here, I've pinned this particular version of overwrite, which comes out of the play menu, and it's overdub. It's this one here. See, there's this overdub that doesn't have the little box around it. This means this overdub behavior only applies to the arranger timeline. But this overdub button applies to what happens inside the clip launcher. So this is what you use to do overdubs inside of the clip launcher. And you can you can pin it. You can see I click this thumbtack symbol to actually pin it up to my toolbar so I can always see it and know what it's doing, what state it's in, like it's on or it's off. So the easy way to record into clips in time is to rehearse your chop and then use a shortcut key or something to toggle overdub on while you're playing so you're keeping your good timing, and then just stop playing, you know, once you've done your complete 4-bar riff. So that's exactly what I'm going to do here is I'm going to play this pattern, wait till it spins around to the top, and then I'm going to actually toggle overdub on so that this suddenly starts recording in an overdub mode, the MIDI notes that I'm playing on my controller. So we're just going to start everything playing. You can watch that happen. By the way, there's a button on my push that I'm using to toggle the overdub on and off. That's how I do it. It's because then it's right there. My left hand will toggle it on and off. My right hand plays the riff. So here we go. Let's play the whole thing. So you can see everything's in time, coming up to the 4th bar. I'm going to practice for a bar or two, and then I'll turn overdub on. There we go. Okay, 3, 4. Damn it. Undo. Right? So I just press the undo button on my push. Let's try again. And we'll turn overdub on. And then I just stop touching keys and turn off overdub and stop the clip. So you can see that it gives you runway. You don't have to play with like count-ins and all that crap that throw you off. It's better to just get in the groove, let the loop play, and when you're ready, just toggle on this overdub, get it recorded, stop playing right before you're about to hit the end of the beat so you don't keep overwriting as it rolls around to the beginning again. And now I have a clip that is set up. And I could choose to quantize this if I want, or I could decide that my own human timing is actually better, because we often talk about having things humanized and off the grid. These notes might be too far off the grid. You could nudge them. But the point is, I have a clip. It's raw. It's ready to go. I'm not even going to look at this one again. What I'm going to do now is come over to this clip, stop this clip playing, start this clip playing, do the same trick, but I'm going to do a different chop this time. So let's flip back to this mode so we're not confused by the MIDI panel. And I'll just experiment, find a different groove I like, and then record it. So here we go. So now I have a new clip, and I can go back and forth between these two clips, and they will play in a legato mode. Let's switch over to the other clip. See how it started where the other clip ended? Do the same thing. Right? So this was dirt easy to set up. You saw me create the mudpie for it in about a minute of just messing around with a simple, good starting point patch in a synth somewhere. I used literally one special effect tool, Portal by Output, which is really cool. But I use other things. I use Guitar Rig 5. I'll use, various effect racks. I'll use sound toys. I'll use all kinds of stuff. And I'll crash presets, flip around between different presets, twiddle knobs, make all kinds of crazy sounds in a mudpie. Spend as much time on that as you want. Drag it into Serato Sample, click one button, and then come over here and use this workflow I just showed you for just recording MIDI clips over and over and over. And now any of these are ready to bounce to audio, or I could shuffle between these in real time to get interesting combinations out of all the things I've dreamed up and played with here. And I could be recording that in real time over into a single track in the arranger, right? Lots of workflow possibilities there. So you see this process is super fast, super simple. And I've already got the basics of a good, these are two perfectly good drop riffs I would use in various songs. It's a very res style drop riff, a very 1788L kind of riff, a very mid-tempo riff, but that's the feel and vibe I'm going for, and this mudpie is good for that. Okay, so next thing, why do I set up Serato sample to be already configured for multi-output? Why do I do that? And if you watch down here, let's play this clip. Watch what happens down here. You can see that the individual pads, 1 through 16, are coming out their own channels. Why do we do that? Where's the other one? Where's the other one? Oh. That sucks. I had this set up correctly, I thought. Well, we'll do it by the way you have to set it up. You have to first use Bitwig's thing here to add all the missing chains and get your multi-outs from the thing. Then, every plugin that has multi-output capabilities usually has some way to set it up. I figured Serato would remember this inside of my preset, so maybe I grabbed the wrong Serato when I first saved this to my user library. Or maybe Serato's buggy and won't remember this. But either way, here's how you do it. You basically tap pad number 1, and then come here and say, set it to channel 1. Tab number 2, channel 2. Tab number 3, channel 3. 4, 4, 5, 5. And unfortunately, there's no flyout list. I just have to use these arrows. I can't scroll with my cursor. I just have to click to flip around. So there's 5 and 5. 6 is 6, 7, 7, 8, 8. Oops. 8, 9. Annoying when it gets to here. This is why it should be able to save it as a preset. 12, 13, 14. Now you could forego this unless you want to do special processing, but honestly, it should save this. I'm going to check this in a minute. This should be 15. This should be 16. Okay, so now this thing's set up to actually do multi-outs. Let's watch this again. There's one up here, one here. And there's the other one. Okay, so see, it's jumping around to different output channels. Now, let me do a thing real quick. Let's see if this actually remembers, right? I'm just overwriting the first one I did. This one's loaded with a sample. I tried loading it into my user library originally with a empty sample, and maybe that's why it didn't remember this stuff, because I actually deleted all the pads. So let's briefly see what happens real quick if I drag this back into a new track, just for grins. Just before I forget, Control T for a new instrument track. Let's drag Serato chopper in here. Let's open up Serato sample, and we can see that we have the channels. And if I go over here to the, let's see, turn you on. So yep, this is set to channel 1, 2, 3, 4. So I just messed up when I 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. So I guess you have to have one sample loaded in here by default so that these pads have all been created. And then it remembers the channel that you assigned each pad to. Back to channel 1. So that's how you get Serato sample to just already be configured to do this. All right, let's throw this away because that's a dupe. Let's come back to here. So why do we want to have the multi-out behavior? Well, let's say this track here is, let's find out which one's playing. So the first sound in the riff is the pad number 9, right? What if pad number 9 is a little too wimpy? What if I want to filter it? What if I want to add distortion to it? What if I want to beef it up and make it nastier, right? So I can click this channel, click this plus sign, and let's just throw, for example, let's put Serum FX on it, because everyone knows Serum, right? You've got Serum, you use Serum, and everyone knows all the basic tricks we can do with their FX stuff to get nasty, nasty stuff. Like distortion has some of these great modes like Diode 2. And let's see what that sounds like if we now run just that one sample through Serum FX with Diode 2 and a little bit of distortion. See what it sounds like. Right? Give it a little more drive. Okay, let's put a little bit of quick and dirty OTT on here, right? Right? Okay, let's put a little hyperdimension on here, give it some depth. Let's move this down here, maybe. Let's crank up this a little bit. Let's turn the unison down. Come on, all the way down. Thank you. Let's add some reverb. okay, et cetera, et cetera. So this is why you typically want multi-outs from Serato Sample so that you can come in here and do all the post-processing you want. Biggest, longest chain you want. Put on your fat racks, put on your serum effects, put on whatever your favorite saturator is, or compressors or filters, or, you know, start adding modulators and make movement to that sound. There's all kinds of crazy stuff you can do to take the original plain dry chop, which sounds like this, kind of wimpy by itself. But, you know, most of bass music is post-processing of sounds that are effectively pretty boring and wimpy by themselves. But, you know, we've got some nice chops to work with here. Okay, great stuff to play with. Look at how fast this was. Look at how simple this was. This is the way a lot of my friends do their drops. This is the way my mentors taught me well, they taught me this is one possible techniques for coming up with your drops. And honestly, it's one of the fastest and easiest techniques. Anything else you do, like if you're loading up six different instances of serum or phase plant, and then spending 10 minutes scrolling through presets trying to find a good sound that'll work for this song, screw that. It's too slow, right? Pick a really good, fat, meaty, moving, interesting loop or preset in one of your favorite synths. Play games with it, tweak knobs, change oscillators, change ratios, put on effects like I did with Portal, make a big 5-minute mudpie, drop it into something like Serato Sample, which is the easiest way to do it in Bitwig. Spend a little money, get a good VST, put it in Serato Sample, and then now you've got these instant chop machines. Okay, so the last thing to show you about Serato Sample that I didn't yet is this. So what if we don't like the ones that it came up with? What if we like some of them, but we don't like others? Like, that's a great one. This pad right here. So I'm going to right click it and where's my lock? Where's my lock? I think it's favorite, right? I do this to lock this, right? Let's check my other pads. It's okay. It's a little aggressive, but I'll keep it. That's good. That's a different timbre. Good to down growls. That's a little harsh, maybe. I'll let that one go. So let's go here and favorite that one. Let's favorite that one. We decided we liked it. This one, however, I'm going to let it change. That's okay. That's okay. It's a little comb filtered and metallic for my taste. Nah, heck it. I'm going to let that one go too. So this one, that one's good. I'll keep that. So you can go through here and mark the ones you want to keep, right? Then the next thing you can do is just click Find Samples again. And what it does is it leaves alone the ones you favorited or locked, and it makes a whole new set of slices. It's picking them for you. Right? So that's one way to do it, and just keep locking down the ones you like and re-rolling with this button. There's certain different algorithms it has for finding your samples. Like, do you want it to be random? Do you want it to be a slicer? You know, how do you want it to do? You can read up on Serato Sample for doing that. I usually just keep it on the default. And then you can take any one slice you don't like say this one. Let's say I don't like this one and I just want to find a different sound. I can select, right-click, no, select it and then press delete, and now it goes away. And now I can simply come anywhere I want in the sample. Like, let's find the one on the other side of it. So here's the one on the other side of it, and here's the one on the other side of it. So let's say I want it, you know, to use some space in the middle here. I can come in to the middle of this space and just press this pad. And wherever my playhead is just like a DJ controller. Right? Because it is Serato. This is basically like how DJs work. Find a spot you like, get close, set the marker by clicking the pad, and now we can audition it and maybe adjust this marker. Okay, I don't really like that. Let's try moving distraction. No, I don't really like that. No, I don't really like anything in here. So what I'm going to do is just go somewhere else entirely. I'm going to zoom out a little bit, and heck, let's just stick it way over here. It's kind of out of order now, but who cares? Not bad. What's happening here? That's kind of good. I can see using that. So now I'll favorite that one and move on, right? So there's a lot of ways you have to adjust and change and lock in the pads you want to have so that they don't get messed up. You can use its automatic, like I'll suggest slicing points for you. You can also set some of these to loop if you want them to, be something really short, like a certain waveform, and just keep looping, point, 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 point. You can do that, but I tend to not bother. And then you can do some processing for each individual sample. You can filter it. You can adjust the attack and release envelope. You can make it quieter or louder. You can shift it. And it's Serato's pitch transposition is really good. Here. Right. Shift it. Hey, let's time stretch it. Let's double speed it. Okay, let's half speed it. And it's just that one pad. All the other pads are still running at normal speed. All right, but this pad, we've got time stretching on. Or you could do a certain, smaller percentage of time stretching. So you've got all these options. It's right here. It's ready to go. I could even take this entire mudpie. Let's say, I've been working this project in E. What if I'm doing a project in F or G or D sharp, right? Let's say I'm doing the project in F. I can just come here to the global tuning and just go boink. And now every one of these samples is now in the key of F. Let's go back down to E. Let's go back up to G. See how good that sounds? They're using a really good stretching algorithm inside of Serato. Serato's pitch stretching and time stretching is among the best out there, probably using the best possible elastic algorithms for all I know. They do a good job. They don't kill the transients. If you're not, doing a ridiculous amount of transposition, you don't hear gappiness, you don't hear artifacts. It's great transposition. So if you can't tell, I'm in love with Serato Sample. It was a good friend of mine from Producer Dojo who recommended this to me back when I was complaining about doing stuff like this on Machine. And their advice was just get Serato Sample, you're going to love it. And sure enough, I do. And when I flipped from Ableton over to Bitwig and realized that this kind of workflow was hard in Bitwig, too many things I have to click and set up and configure. First thing I reached for was Serato Sample and said, yeah, this gets the job done perfectly. So hope you enjoyed this. A little bit different from what I've been doing with all the grid stuff. Maybe you get some ideas for your own projects, or maybe you think I'm just crazy. Your call. But anyway, I had fun doing this for you, and I'll see you next time.